Yeah, thank you everyone for joining me this morning. It's been a fantastic experience so far in this venue. A lot more quiet than the last time I came here, of course. A lot more shouting and hollering downstairs, so it's great to be here. I just wanted to share a few thoughts really this morning around, I suppose, building on the panel we had this morning, looking at the idea of workplace talent retention and how the workplace is a real key factor there. So I wanted to share a few examples of what some of our clients are doing in the marketplace and also some key trends that we're seeing in the industry. So just to introduce myself, I've been working with Trimble now for over 10 years, so working with a lot of organisations who are trying to grapple with changing workplaces and space utilisation as key topics for them moving forwards. And I guess the workplace is changing significantly. I mean, we touched upon a few of the topics this morning around increased agility in the workplace. And we're seeing across our clients a number of different challenges they're being set from their board downwards. The first is that talent retention topic. A lot of organisations are seeing increased competition for talent across many different sectors. And for them, they're seeing this so-called war for talent, and the workplace is really the battlefield. I think you mentioned at Close Brothers the feeling you get when you walk through the reception. Do I want to work here? Do I fit here? The workplace is being seen as a bit of a shop front, really, for potential graduates and recruitment of people in the industry to get them on board and join the organisation. So I think that's really a key objective for corporate real estate and workplace to be aware of. I think the second thing, the agile workplace is here to stay. I think there's no going back. There's obviously a bit of a backlash in the press around the open office. Perhaps that's a bad thing, but I think it is here to stay. And I think that there's, the requirement here is to optimise the business and productivity in the open workplace. How do we allow colleagues to find each other quickly, find free space, get on with their work as quickly as possible? So that's another key challenge that we're seeing across our clients. And also much more of a focus on the experience in the workplace as well. So I think the likes of WeWork, ride a little bit on this experience factor. We've certainly seen it prior to that, where it's around providing this community and providing these collaborations. And I think Anthony at Edelman, had some really good examples there of the cinema on Thursday and the idea of bringing everyone together. I think that a lot of organisations have these silos that they're trying to break down, so that if you're just in finance, you're talking to other people, you're meeting other people, and that's good not just from a retention perspective, trying to build that community, but it's also good for idea generation and productivity in general, to have these different organisations talking to each other, and the idea of these serendipitous encounters, the ideas that are generated by the water cooler moment type of thing. I think that's really important as well to build that collaboration. And of course, the third area, to do all of this whilst minimising the cost of occupation up to 30%. That's always been there, and I think that will continue to be there moving forwards. So how do we look to provide a better workplace at a reduced cost? And using the agile working and the desk sharing, we can look to reap the dividend from increased sharing of spaces there. And particularly at the start of this year, if anyone's involved in lease accounting or working with the corporate real estate team, the way that leases are accounted on the balance sheet has changed significantly since the start of this year. So that your business won't just be paying the lease as a monetary payment, those leases are also capitalised on the balance sheet. So what that means for big organisations is you now have huge liabilities that weren't there certainly December last year. So it's not just what am I paying for my space, it's also what is that doing to my business for the investor relations side of things. So there's actually a bigger impact now on the cost of leases on the balance sheet there. Much more focus on, do we have the right space at the right cost in the right areas there? So those are a few comments about the challenges we're seeing today. And I always think it's quite good to kind of look back to perhaps 10 years ago, where we've come from to where we are today, to understand some of the trends that are ongoing in the workplace and perhaps how we're managing the spaces, how that is evolving over time. So, when I first started working for Trimble, the traditional workplace 10 years ago was very much you go into a client organisation, you'd have the desks in the middle, and you'd have the offices or conference rooms towards the outside of that building. And the design of the workplace and the desks themselves was fairly uniform. You'd see cubes or desks that would be almost the same across the whole organisation. You'd have your own space, you'd have a large desktop PC, you'd have your storage, your filing cabinet there perhaps, and you'd have quite a large amount of space per person, 8-10 metres squared, feet squared per person, for example, in that scenario. And the way that the spaces were managed was on that 1-to-1 ratio. You'd have to go into the office to access your server, your files. There was no mobile technology then. You had to be in work to be productive. So you had a desk Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and there was very little mobility in place there. And in terms of the actual planning of the occupancy there, you'd have a planned occupancy of around 85% of that building. And you keep 15% of this building as swing space. So you do maybe every quarter, large moves, adds and changes projects. You might be doing stacking and blocking to try to optimise the use of this space by moving people around. So these were quite big projects where you'd be moving all of the kit that these people had, all of the storage and so on. It was quite a large scale affair. And on any typical day, you'd have utilisation of around 43% or so, and it would be fairly predictable. Because everyone was coming into the office, it was something where 1 week was fairly similar to the next. There was very little change. Of course, in holiday periods, obviously you'd see reductions there, but it was relatively predictable. And the way that we'd monitor utilisation could be done with floor walks, typically. So like a clipboard, you could go around, and on a typical week, you get a fair idea, and that would be your benchmark, and it wouldn't change too much there. Now, of course, today the workplace is very different. If we look at the design of the buildings, there's a lot more glass, a lot more open, and the meeting rooms and collaboration areas are usually towards the core of the building, and the workspaces are kind of spread out outside of that as well. And the actual design of the workplaces themselves, very different. A lot smaller desks. We don't need the big desktops anymore. We don't need our own, filing cabinet, but we do have lockable storage where we are perhaps shifting across different desks and different areas there as well. And we've seen increased use of activity-based working too. So the idea of different styles of workplace settings depends on what type of activity you have that day. So, one of our clients at the cooperative group, they had a kind of like a triangle-shaped floor plate, and each of the corners they had an area for concentration, one for collaboration and one for communication. So you gravitate to which corner based upon your activity that day, and then with desks kind of on the outsides of that triangle. So we're seeing that much more frequently, the idea of not just taking away things, but adding more to the workplace and the choice of workplace there as well. So in the flexible workplace, the whole building is occupied in this scenario. So vacancy is now a dated term, and we're oversubscribing the people to desks. And that's fairly common now. I think that's here to stay. So instead of one person to one desk, we've maybe got 12 people to 10 desks, or 15 people to 10 desks. And that flex ratio is something that we're managing. It's quite important for our overall occupancy of our building and our wider portfolio there. We'd also be looking at the utilisation of the space. It's varying over time. So as people are coming into the office, some are working from home, some are meeting suppliers and clients, and they're coming in and using this space much more as a collaboration hub, and less so perhaps as a workspace for private work, with some of that being done at home and other areas there. So generally speaking, the utilisation is varying amongst teams, different times of the year. Perhaps finance teams are rushing in for the quarter end, whereas perhaps sales and marketing teams are out in the field. So there are these trends that are taking place. And I guess the nature of work now is that work is now something that you do. Location is less important. It's not really somewhere you go. So these are some of the key trends that we're seeing. And now, of course, if we look to the workplaces of today and yesterday, there still are buildings that I go into that are on the left side there. They still have the kind of the old portfolio that they had for 10, 15 years in that lease. To be able to invest into an entire portfolio to bring it up to today's standards requires a lot of investment. And typically across a portfolio, new builds and relocations are about 5 or 10% of the portfolio. So that means that there is a significant amount of estate which really is kind of in the 1990s still, but everyone's trying to work as agile as possible with the right side. So there is a challenge here where if we want to attract and retain the talent, we need to recognise that perhaps we don't have the ideal workplace today, but what can we do moving forwards to try and bring us from the 1990s into the 21st century? And you know, the workplace, the ideal workplaces, we have the benefit of seeing quite a few of these really. It's those that provide a real, good choice of space. Areas where you can gravitate to those teams and departments and collaboration areas. It's very much organic, and those offices, they feel like they have a good buzz when you walk into them, and that's a palpable thing. I think you can feel that when you walk through. And a lot of organisations are very proud of the type of experience they're able to provide. And I think the likes of many organisations are looking to the likes of WeWork and other co-working communities to basically, I suppose, purchase that type of experience as a service. So that maybe if they've got challenges where they're stuck in old leases, they may be looking to use some of this co-working space to flex, but also provide better quality experiences on top of what they already have as well. Now, with this choice and increased changing working practices is resulting in lower rates of utilisation. Now, obviously, we've got the utilisation on the left there. This is a report by CBRE, which I found really interesting, which was looking at utilisation by different sectors. So you'd probably see your sector there and see the rough utilisation. I think it's interesting to see legal services is quite highly utilised. So speaking to a lot of my legal clients, they have a lot of challenges to flexible working. If I imagine a lawyer's desk, it's stacked high with papers and documents. And there's also an element of, I think, presenteeism a little bit in some of the more traditional law firms where you have to be seen to be involved in some of the projects. Whereas the business services and consultant firms down the bottom there, the likes of Deloitte and PwC, are always out meeting their clients. So for them, they've got very low levels of utilisation. But this is resulting in vast swathes of the estate where we're not getting a return on that investment. So if we go back to the cost element, we could be looking at 40–50% of the total cost of our occupation is being underutilised. So there's a big opportunity there to recapture that value, use those savings to reinvest in a better quality workplace there. And I suppose the key part of this battle is understanding the space usage. And one of our clients at Juniper said that understanding the usage of the space really gave them justification to say, yes, we can change this workplace, and this is the proof. So it was a key part of their business plan to actually close down one of their buildings, reconsolidate, and use those savings to invest into the buildings that they were retaining moving forwards. And space utilisation, has really kind of grown over time, and there's a huge amount of technologies coming into this space, which I think is really exciting. It's one of the most exciting parts of workplace. It really started with using the IP network and access control. I think those are areas that many clients have been using for some time around understanding whether a space is being used at the desk level or in the building level. Of course, that's not giving you understanding of where people are going in that space, and that's where a lot of these technologies like PIR sensors under the desk, or perhaps sensors in the ceiling that are able to count where people are. These have been used quite widely across many organisations. And then, perhaps as the desktop PCs have been moved to laptops, a lot of companies have been looking to triangulate where the Wi-Fi signal is. So give the presence of someone in that particular zone in that instance. And then other more interesting technologies coming through, like Bluetooth mesh networks on apps on phones to give you an idea of where you are in the position of a building for indoor navigation. And also things like smart lighting being implemented in new buildings particularly, where they have these sensors inbuilt in within those. And finally, emerging technologies still coming through. There's a provider that has these chips that look the size of a Scrabble chip. And you can stick them on a desk, and those batteries last up to 8 years. So the idea of the Internet of Things being everywhere, I think, is starting to come into the FM and workplace area, which is becoming very interesting. And the concept of 5G, I think, has a potential huge impact for workplace and FM in the future. So the idea of we're all carrying our phones in our pockets, GPS doesn't work so well in a building, but with 5G it would provide you a positioning within about 30 centimetres of that mobile device. So the idea of indoor positioning and indoor navigation and indoor sat-nav could almost be free with 5G without any additional sensors needed. So I think that this topic is really exciting, and we're seeing a huge amount of investment of people coming into that place. But of course, once you've understood some of these technologies on the marketplace, well, how do you start to dig into the complexity of all these different areas and trends and provide a workplace strategy that really is going to drive value for the organisation? Well, the first part is aligning the organisation around a workplace strategy. Now, a lot of organisations don't understand what spaces they own or what they lease, and just understanding the portfolio is a challenge for some organisations where they've got disparate teams, different locations, using different systems. So just simply knowing what you have, I think, is the key starting point. And then understanding where you need to get to. What are the key performance indicators you're driving towards in terms of occupancy, in terms of space planning perspectives, and also how is the business growing over time and how does the workplace need to grow and adapt to meet that. And so this workplace strategy will provide a framework for these decisions that you'll need to make on the portfolio level. Moving on to the next phase, we're then onto the floor plan level. And then we're understanding, well, what's the best way of us using the space we have on this floor plate? Perhaps if we're seeing utilisation of desks being quite low and meeting rooms being quite high, well, that tells us we need a bit more collaboration area. So why do we try to consolidate the desks and create more co-working hubs and meeting room spaces based upon what we're seeing is needed in the organisation? So this is allowing us to understand the workplace demand and also how we're going to adapt that supply to meet that there. Then we could look at maybe room and desk reservations as well. And this is a great way of encouraging flexibility and sharing by having a booking system that has rules around who can book and reserve what spaces. And this will also allow you to increase the headcount per desk as well. We always say that getting a sharing ratio of 1.2, so having 120 people on 100 desks, is relatively straightforward, because out of those 100 people, 20 of those are going to be on holiday or working from home. But if you wanted to ratchet that dial up even further to 1.4, 1.6, that's where you start to need to have some structure in place to say, actually, we need to provide booking rules and zones and neighbourhoods so that people can reserve spaces as needed there. Then, of course, after the event, we want to capture the utilisation. We want to plug into any of these technologies that we find in the buildings, the access control, the Wi-Fi, the badge swipes in and out the building, sensors under the desk or in the ceiling. We want to consume all of that data to get an understanding of what's our space usage across our portfolio. And then once we have that, we can then benchmark. We can start to say, well, what are our best performing locations? Which areas perhaps are not performing as well? And then on the portfolio level, say, well, do we need 5 buildings in London? And if the utilisation is 50 odd percent, could we not consolidate, actually get rid of that last building, tied in with the lease break, and use that saving to invest into the remaining buildings? And so it's the understanding of this process, I think, will give you the data that's needed to build that business case to justify these decisions on that level. And we're seeing a lot of our clients and other organisations behaving in this way. So Morgan Stanley, they found with the lease accounting changes that there was an extra $3.5 billion added to their balance sheet on the leases. So for them, they're going through this huge rationalisation across their portfolio. So many hundreds of buildings across the world where they are looking at driving the occupancy of a 1 person to 1 seat ratio to 1.2 across the globe. And for them, they're finding challenges where certainly organisations aren't really receptive to this increased sharing. Home working, flexible working doesn't work in some cultures and some countries as well. So they're having to work through that. But what they're doing is putting in place the strategy from the top level down, and then providing the right tools and the right management techniques for those local regions to be able to, I suppose, push towards this goal and at the same time reduce the cost of their portfolio. So this is a key strategy, part of their strategy moving forwards for them. And then on the workplace planning side, and we've got a large global financial organisation who is doing something very similar. So they're looking at taking the floor plates and redesigning those if they're stuck in the lease for 10, 15 years, looking to refit those floor plates to make it much more agile, creating the zones and neighbourhoods so that teams have a department zone, so they know where to go to. They have an ownership of a zone, not an individual desk. And then using these metrics, they're able to push the occupancy up by consolidating in this way, and also providing much more collaborative areas as well moving forward. So for them, they're doing this again on a global scale, starting with pilots in London and in the US, and now pushing further east to East Asia and Australia as well. Now, on the reservation side, I suppose this does enable end users to be able to find each other and find free spaces. And so, one of our clients, a large UK government organisation, was able to increase the capacity of a 5,000 building location by 25% by increasing the desk booking within those zones and neighbourhoods. They're actually a government organisation based in a large donut-shaped building in Cheltenham. I'm not allowed to say the name of the company, but you probably guessed it from that. But obviously, with the shape of the building, they couldn't build an annex on the side, so they had to stay in that building and obviously use as much of that space as they possibly could moving forwards. And then with regard to meeting room space, often it's around inviting clients into the workplace as well. So we've seen the likes of Deloitte manage all of their client meeting rooms through the single system, where you can book internal space but also invite your colleagues and clients in to have a lunch or a catering meeting, have all the visitors all processed in the same way. And it's around attracting and retaining clients for them. It's around providing this unrivaled client experience where the system is managing all aspects and all touch points of those interactions there. And then towards the utilisation aspect, we've worked with Royal Bank of Canada, where they're looking across a number of different sensor types, and for them there's a huge amount of technology out there, and it can become quite confusing around what types of sensors perhaps work well for organisations. So for them, they're doing a pilot of about 5 or 6 different sensor types, and seeing the benefits for themselves around the accuracy and how well they're counting the space and so on. And this is providing them a live dashboard of how the space is being used right now, but also allowing staff to find free spaces. So instead of perhaps booking a conference room, it's around them looking on a phone or on a screen to say, okay, this space is green, I can walk into it, and then it starts glowing red on the app. So for them, this is a real key benefit for them moving forwards, and it's something they see as a wider benefit for the potential future as well. And then really onto that review phase, looking at the heat maps and saying, okay, well, could we do better? So this was an example from Sun Life, who was looking at their floor plate and saw different pockets of neighbourhoods and different usage trends there. And they noticed that the neighbourhood on the top right was very highly utilised, but there was a pocket of green spaces there. And by looking at the data, they were able to see, well, why was that the case? And so they did a walkthrough and saw that no one wanted to sit in this area because it was right where the vents came through for the air conditioning. So for people there, it was too cold and too noisy. So it told them, actually, we need to do something about this. So they made a change to this layout and made a change to that area. So it allowed them to make better usage of that particular part that was underperforming on the floor plate there as well. So with all of this information, it's allowing us to understand how we're performing and taking that insight to drive towards smarter outcomes. So if we're able to benchmark our buildings and our floors and our departments by occupancy and vacancy and some of these other metrics that we might be tracking, it will allow us to understand, do we want to or need to acquire more space? If we're growing as an organisation, do we need additional floor, like Anthony mentioned at Edelman? Do we need to grow in our building or perhaps acquire new premises? Could we perhaps look to consolidate and maybe dispose of some space? I think that's true for many organisations. I think that the way that people are working now, we certainly could look to consolidate on that way, and many organisations are doing just that. If we're stuck in leases, we could look at what options are available. Do we have options to break, perhaps? And does that give us an ability to perhaps look at much more flexible, agile workspace, looking at WeWork and other locations as well, to kind of combine with this portfolio that we're looking at? If we're stuck in that building or we want to remain in that building, if it's the right location for us, perhaps we could look at refurbishments and looking at ways of bringing up the location to the standards that we really want to have moving forwards. And of course, the abilities for us to restack and reorganise those spaces, and looking at the occupancy and always making changes. I guess the way that people are using workplace is never static. So if we're able to treat it as an organic thing, we can look to identify the trends and constantly readjust the workplace as we're seeing the demand come through there. So yeah, that was what I wanted to share with you this morning. Hope that's been quite helpful. I mean, happy to take any questions if anyone's got any.
Lovely. Thanks very much, John. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
You mentioned there that you see a lot of these more old-fashioned buildings, and we've still got, despite this kind of trend, I guess, to more flexible leases, we've still got a lot of organisations who've got quite long leases in the more old-fashioned buildings. How can they kind of, I mean, you said that, a bit of a restack and they can create some fantastic internal environments, but will that ever really compare to, if you're an employee looking for a new business to work for, to like a sexy new build? Is that a difficult thing to do, some of this ageing infrastructure we've got?
It is a challenge. I think that again, you touched upon that in the panel this morning. I think that HR was always seen as the talent retention part of the organisation. It was always just their goal, whereas now I think IT and real estate and workplace are being brought into that, and quite rightly so. But of course, there's only so much that can be done with regard to budgets and the buildings that we're in. So it's a case of looking across these departments and saying, well, could we perhaps make small changes that make a big difference? So I've seen organisations look to have much more communal areas in spaces, and kind of areas of kitchen areas and so on, that they have kind of collaboration hubs and workbenches, and small changes that I think can make a big difference in terms of the impact of that location there. But yeah, it is a challenging one, and I think that's where some organisations are using the likes of the WeWorks and so on to not only have the swing space where they need it, but also to provide a little bit of that, I suppose, that smart
glamour
workplace.
as well.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly with, I suppose the demographic is changing as well. There's new people coming into the workforce that have, I think you mentioned the comment, it was different perceptions or different expectations. So, it could be that organisations are looking to use some of that space to say, well, you could work there, or you could work here, and it gives them an element of choice, which I think would potentially be quite appealing there.
It's definitely about choice these days, isn't it? I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was all about, there's your desk, get on with it. And if you were lucky enough to have a meeting, you went into a meeting room and that was it. And now you just go into spaces like WeWork or indeed other offices, and the element of choice is enormous.
Yeah, and I think that really does help with the productivity angle as well. So the fact that, in your working day, I mean, the Leesman's Index, I think, is a fantastic document that tries to understand productivity and how the workplace either hinders that or enhances that. And so they found that you've got to look at the working day of what someone does and the activities they have. Do you have the right settings that support, focused work, concentration work? A lot of the backlash against open offices is the fact that people have just done open offices but not thought about providing an element of choice, so that people can choose to shut themselves away from the noisy office if they've got to take a private phone call. If there isn't that choice there and they're just stuck in this bullpen, no one's productive, everyone's being disturbed, and that's where you have everyone with the headphones on.
Which doesn't help with collaboration, doesn't it?
No, or productivity as well. So the choice is a key part, I think, for not just talent retention, but also, I think, productivity as well.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Joe, or any thoughts that they'd like to share about their own workspaces? From my side, I think the best thing you said was about indoor sat-nav. As someone with no sense of direction, I have to say I'd find that really useful, particularly in some of these bigger offices. When you come out of meetings and you're like, where on earth am I? Which way do I go?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I probably should pay a bit of lip service to the kind of other side to that, which is the privacy thing, really. With a lot of these tools on the market, there is a big button which is hide me. So you are giving up a little bit of privacy to say this is where I am, and people maybe can find me, but actually I want to be hidden. So you've got the benefit there of having the indoor sat nav. I think that's something that we'll see in the next 5 years or so become quite important in the office, but also a big hide me button.
Absolutely. It's good to have both. Well, if you can just join me in thanking Joe very much for a really interesting.
Thanks very much. Thank you.